A man, after being accused of one of the worst things one can be accused of, was taken out to the middle of the desert and dealt with in one of the most horrific ways possible. But did he even do what he was accused of? This is the Cathedral Canyon murder case. Have you thought about eating better this summer? HelloFresh's menu features calorie-smart and protein-smart lunch and dinner options, plus new vegan dinners to choose from. HelloFresh makes it easy to reach your food goals with great-tasting recipes that always leave you feeling satisfied. HelloFresh gets that you want options for what to make for dinner, not just the same old thing time and time again. That's why they offer 40 recipes to choose from every single week, so you'll never get bored and can always find something new that you'll definitely enjoy. When you need dinner fast, don't call for delivery, just think of HelloFresh instead. Their fast and fresh recipes are ready in just 15 minutes or less. Plus, HelloFresh is 25% cheaper than takeout. For today's video, I decided to try out the sesame soy pork bowls. This one was very quick and easy to make, probably only taking me about 15 minutes. The flavor is awesome, especially when you consider how easy the recipe was. Definitely recommend it. So go to HelloFresh.com and use code DIRETRIP50 at checkout for 50% off plus free shipping. Once again, go to HelloFresh.com and use my code DIRETRIP50 at checkout for 50% off plus free shipping. And now, onto the content. Today we have a story that really highlights the dangers of believing horrific slander about someone that is coming from a less than reputable source and deciding to take justice into your own hands. This isn't going to be the longest video, but it is definitely a heavy one. The subject of today's video is a man named Roy Jaggers. Roy was 27 years old, living in Las Vegas and working as both an electrician and a general contractor. He was big into martial arts, scoring himself a black belt in the CDF Academy and winning himself several different tournaments. One of his other passions was music, with him playing the saxophone in particular. Back in 2021, Roy was living with his mother while he spent a lot of his time working. He was friends with a woman named Heather Pate who lived nearby. He would often do her a solid and go over to her place and look after her children and dogs while she wasn't home. He would often do a little bit of cleaning for her and, from time to time, cook dinner while he was at it. Things were going well for a while. That was until that summer when, for reasons unknown, Heather began to believe that Roy had hurt or done worse to her child. She never did go to the police with those concerns, though. Instead, she decided that she would take matters into her own hands. Heather was not the best kind of person out there. She did have a criminal record, although it was usually just possession charges. But this brings us to the problem. She was an avid drug user and wasn't always in a clear headspace. She was also involved in a long custody battle with the father of her children, who did not want her to have the kids. She proved that she didn't really deserve to have them by dating a man named Kevin Dent, a 36-year-old man who had previously been convicted on charges of child abuse himself. Not only that, he was sitting on a rap sheet that included charges of both battery and resisting arrest with a firearm. He had only gotten out of prison just recently, 8 months prior, when they met and got into a relationship. Heather and Kevin concocted a plan to get rid of Roy. The last time Roy was ever seen was when he was heading back to Heather's house with her. She and Kevin had decided to lure him over to dispense a little bit of what they thought was vigilante justice. When Roy arrived at their house, they locked the door behind them and confronted him with their accusations. While we can never truly know what was said behind closed doors, it's safe to say that Roy likely denied them. This was when both Heather and Kevin started to beat him mercilessly, all while Heather's children were in the home and witnessed the entire thing, from the kidnapping all the way to the brutal assault. Heather and Kevin slapped some handcuffs onto Roy's wrist and wrapped him in a tarp. Heather then decided to call up an associate, a 37-year-old man named Brad Min, who surprisingly had no prior record beyond minor traffic violations. He told Heather that they should throw Roy into the car and drive him out to Nye County so that he could deal with them. So, she did just that. They drove out into the middle of the desert to a remote area where Brad Min could operate without anyone ever coming across the scene. He prepared a large variety of weapons for the occasion, bringing with him a belt, a stapler, a baton, a bayonet, knives, an axe, and even a blowtorch. The three then proceeded to torture Roy Jaggers for hours and hours with all of the weapons at hand. Miraculously, he was still alive at the end of the onslaught. Not satisfied, the three decided to force the man to strip down naked. They took him up to one of the nearby cliffs in the Cathedral Canyon area and forced him to walk off the edge. Roy, left with no choice, did as they said. Even still, this wasn't enough. Bradman went to the bottom of the gorge where Roy had landed and finished him off by shooting him multiple times with a shotgun. At this point, after all he endured, he finally passed away. Brad made the ultimate criminal mistake and went on to brag to his friends, telling them, "The body they found in Cathedral Canyon, I caused it. I killed a pedophile instead of letting the police handle it." On the morning of August 1st, 2021, an anonymous man was hiking through the area when he came across the horrible scene. Needless to say, he called 911 pretty much immediately. The police came out and the man led them to where they could find the body. They then examined the scene, later identifying Roy by his fingerprints. It was immediately clear what had happened to him, at least the last thing that had happened to him, by the numerous shotgun shell casings and pellets littering the area. Although it was very clear that Roy had met with foul play, an autopsy was performed regardless. The autopsy showed that, after all he went through, the gunshots from Bradman were indeed what had actually ended his life. The death was swiftly ruled a homicide and the hunt for the killers was on. It didn't take too long for the police to put the pieces together. After all, Roy was last seen with Heather. Heather was dating Kevin. Brad bragged to anyone who would listen about what he had done. Then, after scoring a search warrant to go out to examine Heather's home, she was caught and arrested herself. In the home, they found more than enough evidence to link Heather, and by association, the two men, to Roy's death. After all, Kevin was dating Heather, living with her at least part-time, and had a violent record. Then, as we know, Brad was already out there bragging to anyone who would listen about his part in the crime. It wasn't too hard to piece things together. Deputies were able to find Bradman's car on State Route 160 and took him in during a traffic stop. He soon confessed and even led police to the murder weapon once he was arrested. It did not take long to find and arrest all three. In fact, it took less than 36 hours from the time of the discovery of the body. They were looking at charges of murder, kidnapping, battery, and conspiracy to commit attempted murder. Given the gravity of what they had done, all three were held without a chance of bail. Brad ended up stuck with a court-appointed attorney who stated that the prosecutors were considering the death penalty for him at least. Roy Jaggers' father, Jerry, was absolutely shocked and disgusted once he heard about what had happened to his son, simply telling news outlets, "How can you do that to another human being?" Roy's mother, left without funds, was left with no choice but to set up a GoFundMe page to pay for his funeral. Once news broke of what had happened, it didn't take long for the page to exceed the original goal of $5,000. On that page, she described how she saw Roy. Roy was so loving and friendly to everyone he met, and the world is now short one amazing angel. While Roy's killers were awaiting their hearing, the police decided to look into whether or not Roy actually ever touched Heather's kids. Admittedly, given that Heather never had contacted the police with her suspicions, the police weren't able to even look into it until after Roy's death. Still though, after a thorough investigation, they found nothing at all that would substantiate the claims that Roy had ever done anything to harm one of her children. Roy's mother, upon hearing this, wasn't surprised at all, saying, "I knew exactly what he was like, what he's capable of, what he's not capable of." Heather's sons were taken from her custody by Child Protective Services. After witnessing the kidnapping and brutal torture of their babysitter, a man they seemed to like, the kids were left pretty traumatized. The youngest, who was only 3 years old when he saw everything, was left with horrible night terrors, never sleeping through an entire night without waking up screaming at some point. In April of 2023, both Heather and Kevin had their day in court. As part of a plea deal, Kevin was allowed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of second-degree murder. While a charge of first-degree murder would have left him looking at 50 years to life in prison, this new deal would have him eligible for parole in only 10 years, despite the brutal torture he performed on top of his already violent, checkered past. Roy's parents were shocked to find that Heather, who started this whole ordeal, was given a deal herself. She was able to plead guilty to a charge of second-degree murder in addition to a charge of first-degree kidnapping. She is going to be eligible for parole in only 10 years. Roy's father has made no secret that he is absolutely outraged that the two were let off so easily after what they had done. This wasn't some sudden, impulsive crime of passion. This was premeditated kidnapping, torture, and murder. Jerry said during an interview with news outlets, "Two of them, to me, on the plea deals, just doesn't make any sense for what he went through. They never contacted us and told us they were pleading Heather out. We had to find out through someone else, and we found out the day before." In May of 2023, the trial began out in Nye County for the triggerman in the murder, Brad Min. Brad, having urged the other two to come out to the desert, provided the weapons, and delivered the final shot, wasn't going to get off as easily as the other two. Brad, now 39 years old, was looking at life in prison after all he had done. The police brought a mountain of evidence to show the court. They pulled out a white cardboard box containing all manner of weapons. A belt, a baton, a bayonet, a stapler, a pistol, an axe, and finally the shotgun used to fire the final shots that ultimately ended Roy's life. The police also showed body cam footage from when they first arrested Brad, in which he admitted that he wanted to hurt Roy so that other men would learn their lesson. They said that Brad had tortured and killed Roy after taking the word of his associate that he hurt kids with zero evidence to back it up or any reason to believe that it was true. Brad's defense argued that he should only be charged with manslaughter because this met what they felt the criteria of a crime of passion. They said that Brad reacted this way because both he and his children were victims of the same sort of abuse that Heather accused Roy of committing. Roy Jaggers' family were there to give their own statements as well, with a particularly gut-wrenching speech from his sister.
Roy Thomas Jaggers wanted to live so bad. He endured and took everything you did to him. And when you kicked him off the cliff, he still ran to make sure that he fought every moment for his life until you shot him in the back like a coward you are. And you chose to end my innocent brother's life for absolutely no reason other than for your own enjoyment. All I can do now is hope and pray that your last day of freedom was the day you took my brother's.
The prosecutors pointed out that, even if that was his reasoning, it didn't change what he had done. The man got one single phone call and immediately made up his mind to go out and torture a man. He loaded up the car with an arsenal of weaponry and even provided a remote location to do the deed. That is all the convincing it took, just one phone call from an associate with a baseless accusation. The jury, provided with a mountain of evidence, deliberated for less than 2 hours before deciding that Brad Minn was guilty. The court found him guilty on one count of first-degree murder with a deadly weapon and kidnapping with a deadly weapon.
Amid both tears and outrage, the family of Roy Jaggers implored jurors to impose the maximum sentence on Brad Minn, the man they found guilty earlier this week of first-degree murder after a weeks-long trial filled with gruesome details. Jurors heard Roy's sister and the rest of the Jaggers family loud and clear, giving Brad Minn the maximum possible sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole.
The district attorney said in a recent statement, "We have now obtained murder convictions for the 3 individuals involved in this heinous crime, who are all facing lengthy prison terms." Once again, thank you for watching my video. Apologies that this video is a little bit shorter, but that really is all the information out there about it. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it helps out in the algorithm, and subscribe if you want to see more weird cases like this. If you want, go ahead and follow me on social media. I mean, you never know what's going to happen with a channel like this. If you want to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon account, which I always keep linked down in the description below, and speaking of which, shout out to the top patrons. We have Anna B., Sunrider, Gabriel Tansick, Lee aka Crust, Emilio Morales, George Lopez, Minnie Tina, Travis Billings, Lettuce, Jason Whitehurst, Lord Fool, Jim Dowell, Kimmy Leffel, Melina Lee Williams Haas, Implado, Stephen Jamie Kramer, Max Sword Guy, Rain Noir, Pao Yang, April Diamond, Starfade, Astral, Angie, Rick of Work in Progress USA, Sash Johnson, Marianne McCurdy, Buttery Frankus, Jules Latona, Arctic Cat, Adrian Lawley, Marsh, Rinsenstein, Kim Peak, Lex Luthor, Lux Alpaca, Charity, Scoochie Main, Jackie, and Mark Barnett. I owe you all one piece of candy. Once again, go to HelloFresh.com and use my code DIRETRIP50 at checkout for 50% off plus free shipping. This has been your host Kyle, thank you, and good night.